Right, well, thank you everybody for coming this afternoon. Some of you have travelled very far to come here today, so we appreciate that very much. I'm Bradley Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the UAE-UK Business Council, and we're your hosts for this afternoon. For those of you who are not aware of the Business Council, we're a thought leadership organisation. We bring business leaders, academics and entrepreneurs together from both the UAE and the UK to discuss barriers to doing business and new and emerging opportunities. And we work very closely with both governments. For those of you who would like to know a little bit more about the Business Council, we have our business guide that was published last September for you to take away with you and find out a little bit more about us. This is the biggest event we've ever done, so thanks for coming and supporting us. It's great to be in Aberdeen. Very symbolic place, I think, because I think Aberdeen encapsulates the energy transition that we're going to be speaking about today. It's reinventing itself as a global hub for energy transition, while also, of course, continuing to sustain the oil and gas industry as it innovates and prepares for a new future. So you're going to hear today from some leading Aberdeen-based organisations that are really pivotal in driving momentum in the energy transition. We've chosen to host this event in Aberdeen, and we've chosen to host it today to align with the Energy Exports Conference that is taking place in Aberdeen tomorrow and Wednesday. That's being hosted by the Energy Industries Council, and we're really very grateful to them for the support that they have shown us in organising this event. We've also been greatly supported by Scottish Development International, who have really supported us in working through the themes of today's event. And we're also very, very grateful to our three sponsors, without whom this event wouldn't be happening. And that's Wood, Exodus Group, and Petrofag. So very appreciative of their support. In terms of today's event, there's not going to be a coffee break because we've got so much to get through, but there's going to be coffee on tap anytime you need it on the side of the room. So if you need a bit of caffeine, please do help yourselves. This event isn't being live streamed, we're being quite traditional, but we are recording it. We will put the video recording on our YouTube channel. And we've got a photographer here as well. We'll be taking lots of photographs. Please feel free to use that material on your own social media networks and for your own promotional purposes. Finally, I'm sure like me, you're all very, very glad at last to be doing in-person events once again after such a long time of just seeing pixelated faces on a screen. It's a real pleasure to be doing an in-person event again. And of course, I know that the thing that you've missed most from not being able to attend in-person conferences is the health and safety briefing that you have to listen to at the beginning. So I'd now like to introduce Stephanie from the Marcliffe Hotel to just brief you on some of the health and safety aspects of today's event.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the Marcliffe Hotel and Spa. This is the Grand Ballroom where you'll be situated most of the afternoon. There is no planned fire alarms this afternoon, so in the event that the alarm does siren continuously for no less than 30 seconds, then evacuation will be required. We have 3 fire exits in this room, one to the left of the stage, one to the rear, and the door in which you entered the Grand Ballroom this afternoon. And the muster point is in the lower car park. I won't hold you up. Thank you very much and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I'd now like to introduce our first keynote speaker. As I mentioned, the UAE-UK Business Council is a bilateral organisation. So we have 2 co-chairs. Our UAE co-chair, who unfortunately is not able to be with us today, is His Excellency Ahmed Al Sayed, who is a Minister of State in the UAE government. And our UK co-chair is the Right Honourable Lord Adney Lister, who is here, and I would like to invite him to the stage to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you all for that little clap just now. I've got an admission to make to you. I left my glasses sitting carefully by my front door, so you are all actually a blur. So I can't actually see you. So when you please feel free to nod off, go to sleep, do anything you like. It won't disturb me one little bit because I can't see you. I would like to just start off before I say anything. Just a word of thanks to 3 people. Firstly, and I'm really grateful to her, is rather Al-Taba, who is the Deputy Ambassador. She's here today. Thank you very much for supporting us. She always supports us. She's been wonderful. But she's also a really busy time at the UAE Embassy. There's a lot going on. So the fact she's actually here just tells you how important we are to the UAE Embassy. So thank you very much for your support. The second person is Councillor Rung McFall, who's the Deputy Provost of Aberdeen, and I'm sorry, I can't see him anymore because he's not in the front row, so he's somewhere in the mass of people here. And then also to Stuart Broadley, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the EIC. And Stuart has been really helpful to us in putting this event on, giving us a lot of advice and assistance, and we are enormously grateful to you, Stuart. So thank you very much. And a lot of you will probably be seeing Stuart. Well, you might see him today. He's here somewhere. But you'll also see him if you're going to the conference tomorrow. So, but thank you. The origins of the groundbreaking agreement was signed number 10 last September between the Prime Minister and the Crown Prince of the UAE, who is now, of course, the ruler of the UAE, following the sad passing of his father. It was the beginning of a massive amount of activity between the UK and the UAE. And at that meeting, they agreed a partnership in the future, which was very wide-ranging, but placed really strong emphasis on collaboration between the two countries in building momentum, particularly in the energy transition sector. That is a priority for both the UK, who is looking for investment, and the UAE, who is looking for companies to get involved in their journey as well, and also to invest there, and also manufacture there. So there's a great deal of synergy between the two governments. This is a priority area. Mubadala, who is the main investment company of the UAE, signed the £10 billion deal with the UK Office of Investment, and that is now underway, and they've already made a number of very clear commitments and investments in the UK. We have a shared ambition to invest in skills and technology, and the quickening pace of climate change is driving closer collaboration between us both. UK were responsible for the COP at Glasgow. This year there is a COP in Cairo, or rather in Egypt. It's not actually in Cairo. And then next year it is in the UAE. So we're all on the same journey. And it's very important for all of us is to work out how we're going to transition from fossil fuels to a post-carbon future. And that's all about diversifying the economy, developing new energy sources, and investing in talented people. And people is one of the big things here. We need the engineers, the skill sets, the financiers. That's a priority for the UAE. It's also a priority for the UK. And in March this year, the Prime Minister reaffirmed his commitment to the North Sea oil and gas industry as a key asset in the UK's plans for achieving greater energy independence, in ensuring the country's smooth transition to net zero and being part of the solutions needed for a cleaner future, which is now even more important following the terrible things that have happened in Ukraine and the problems with Russian gas and oil. And there is a bill due to be introduced into the next parliamentary session on this. Aberdeen is already paving the way for the future. It is the home of the Net Technology Centre, the X Academy, which provides people with the skill sets needed for the energy transition. The city is also the base for some of the world's leading energy transition companies, such as Wood, Exodus, and Petrofac. UAE investors are playing an increasingly important role in helping the UK deliver the transformation required to reach net zero. Masdar, another UAE company, has invested in several innovative offshore wind and energy storage projects in the UK, and they are part of the Partnership for the Future agreement, with the ability to create the environment for more collaboration between our two countries. And we're beginning to see what partnerships will mean in reality. A few weeks ago, BP and ADNOC announced that they were moving to the design phase of their low-carbon hydrogen H2T side project, I'll get it right. ADNOC's first investment in the UK. And that deal includes a feasibility study for a low-carbon hydrogen project in the UAE. And it's worth just dwelling on that for a minute, because I think it's important to keep on reaffirming this. If the UAE is going to make major investments in the UK, part of that criteria must be that they're looking as well for jobs in their own country. So if there are opportunities here where the UAE can invest, and where in due course people can build a factory in the UAE, because it is, after all, in many ways the gateway to the Indo-Pacific, it's a great place to go through as you're thinking about expanding your organization. It has a labor force, it has all sorts of advantages with free zones and other things. So there is here a synergy between investment and job creation, and everybody wants the same thing. So our requirements are aligned. Today's event, we're going to focus on 3 areas. What needs to be done over the next 5 to 10 years to sustain momentum to net zero? Secondly, how we retain the workforce in the oil and gas sector so that we have the skill sets needed for the energy industry for the future. And thirdly, how do we do the financing of a global energy revolution? We have a really impressive lineup of experts from both the UAE and the UK to address these issues this afternoon, and I am extremely grateful to them for taking the time to share their knowledge with us. This event is not being held in isolation. It marks the first in a series of campaigns and events that the UAE-UK Business Council will hold between now and COP28 on the theme of decarbonisation. So please do follow us on social media for updates on further events. As Brad said, the role of the Business Council is to inform both governments on the barriers of doing business between both countries and also the new and emerging opportunities for collaboration. One outcome of today's events will be that we are going to produce a white paper that will be presented to the 2 governments at its next Ministerial Economic Summit, scheduled for later this year. I should just explain that the way the UAE-UK Business Council works, we actually report into that Ministerial Council. That is our route into government. And so we are very much supported by the 2 governments. This isn't a business council that was put together just by a few business people. This was a business council that was put together with the direct support of 2 governments. And we very much have come out of those 2 governments. And it's just making that point that we are in a position where we can lobby both ways. And that's one of our greater strengths. And it's just worth just bearing in mind, so when you think there's something there that is being a barrier, then we're quite useful if you can tell us that. And also please bear in mind that the negotiations on a free trade agreement with the Gulf are starting at the moment. They're at their early stages, but that is the next big event there. And again, we'll be feeding into this. So my plea to you is, please tell us what you think the barriers are. Let's work together. Please use the Business Council as a way of meeting people that you think will be useful to your business on your journey, both in the UAE and the UK. And finally, can I just say thank you again, as Brad has already done, to Exodus Group, Wood and Petrofac, who have been absolutely superb in supporting this event today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Unlike Lord Lister, I came very prepared today. I've got 2 pairs of glasses, so I'll use my reading glasses for now. Our next speaker is Her Excellency Rauda Al-Taiba from the UAE Embassy in London, the Deputy Ambassador. When we set up or relaunched the Business Council in September 2020, she really did mentor us and support us as we thought about what the Business Council's USP would be and how we would add value to an already strong bilateral relationship. And your support has been really instrumental in helping us get to where we are as a Business Council. One of the other things you might not know about Rauda is she's, throughout her career, actually supported issues such as sustainability and energy transition and renewable energy. She represented the UAE at the International Renewable Energy Agency in a past job. And as some of you will know, that is actually headquartered in the UAE, in Masdar City in Abu Dhabi. And she also helped lead the UAE's negotiating team at the Rio Plus 20 Development Summit in 2012. So there's a longer involvement in those kind of issues. So, her knowledge has been very important in positioning the UAE and preparing it for where it's heading to in terms of delivering COP28 next year. So, Rauda, I'd like to invite you to say a few words to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Lister. Thank you, Bradley. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Members and friends of the UK-UAE Business Council, I'm so delighted to be invited to this session, and I want to thank the team for including me for what's going to be an insightful and interesting discussion this afternoon. As I think Brad said, this topic is very close to my heart. Not honestly because I'm expert at all. I have to admit my background is political science, international studies, something far away from energy and climate change. But as Brad said, during my 18 years of experience at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 6 of them were actually around this topic. Starting from 2009, when the government decided to host the International Renewable Agency in Abu Dhabi. It was a 9-month campaign to host the agency, and during that I read a lot about renewables, and I'll be honest with you, I remember the first presentation about that. I said, why? Why do we want to have renewables in the UAE? And that's 2009, because that was a new topic, new things, and I had to learn a lot from my engineer friends who helped me a lot to understand how important to diversify our energy and things about our future. And successfully, we hosted the agency in Abu Dhabi, and it's a home for the agency. And after this great success, we established a Directorate for Energy and Climate Change at the ministry. And during also the 4 years of this department, I was responsible of representing the countries in different climate change talk as Rio, and also different COP meetings, and work in doing a benchmark and try to understand what is different countries, I will say, experience in tackling climate change. So it was also a great experience that honestly contributed a lot to my knowledge, which is still very humble knowledge in renewables. But I think having worked in these roles as a young professional really inspired me and taught me about the significance of climate change, as well as the global and local action that is needed to protect the future of our planet. I stand here today as a representative of a country that is, to be honest, traditionally known to be a key player in the hydrocarbon industry. But as the world is changing and drastic action is needed to combat climate change, the UAE has been quick to take responsibility, and adapt. I will cover 4 different areas in a nutshell. Maybe I will talk a little bit about the government focus in different policies and different business and different initiatives, and I will focus about the international engagement a little bit. In terms of policies, in 2017, the UAE launched the Energy Strategy 2050, which is considered the first unified energy strategy in the country based on supply and demand. And recently, as Ed Lester said and Bradley, in Glasgow COP, we announced the net zero target by 2050. We were the first country in the region to announce a net zero target. It requires a lot of work, and currently the government is working on the strategy and the implementation plan to achieve the net zero target. In terms of business, about 15 years ago, the UAE began financing clean energy project, and we have invested more than 40 billion US dollar to date. Internationally, the UAE was one of the first countries in the region to sign and ratify Paris Agreement, and we were also one of the first countries in the region to commit to an economy-wide reduction in emission. Also, the UAE home for many different initiatives. One of them is Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, where it's an important platform to host different companies and leaders around the world and have a lot of discussions about sustainability and the future of tackling climate change and sustainability. I think Lister spoke clearly about Masdar, which is also an important initiative. As you know, a sustainable city depends on solar energy and other renewable energy resources. This kind of important initiative is set to have a significant impact on the industries and sectors across the Emirates, from infrastructure to agriculture. The UAE truly is at the forefront of regional change. As we diversify our economy, we look to a future that is cleaner, more sustainable, and economically robust, not just for the UAE, but also for countries across the world. We strongly believe that the climate change need to be tackled at both a global and local level. Beyond our wide-ranging domestic policies, sustainability's efforts have therefore also had a big impact on the UAE's collaboration with partners globally. For example, support green infrastructure and clean energy projects across the world. The UAE so far invested in renewable energy ventures worth around 17 billion US dollar in 70 countries, with the focus on developing countries. Actually, part of our bid to host IRENA was the commitment 370 million US dollar for renewable energy project for developing countries, and all the process will go through IRENA. That was a 7 years commitment, which ended, I think, a couple of years ago, and we renewed this commitment in Glasgow COP, and we announced the 400 million, another US dollar for developing renewable energy project managed by IRENA. As Lord Lister mentioned earlier, the UAE has found a trusted sustainability partner in the UK, and he spoke clearly about the partnership for the future signed between both governments last year, which perfectly capture our shared ambitions within the field of sustainability and climate action, and of course energy transition. I believe both agreements will shape our strong economic and diplomatic ties going forward, benefiting the UAE and the UK at national and regional level. The UAE has, for example, made anchor investment in some of the UK largest wind projects, include London Array and of course Degen and Highwind. Highwind project is actually in Aberdeen. I came in 2018. I'm not sure if I have a good memory, but I think it was 2018. I came for the launch of this project, and I had the pleasure of meeting with the first Secretary of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, for the opening of this project. And Masdar, of course, one of the investors in this project. 3 investments have been helped make the UK the world-leading market for offshore wind technology and have promoted job creation regionally to benefit local communities. At the same time, I always like to maybe deliver this message. UAE investment in renewable energy in the UK also contribute to the UK net zero target, which is really important how we internationally how we collaborate together to achieve a global net zero target in the future. Looking ahead, the UAE is proud also to follow the UK footstep as a host of COP, with COP28 coming up in November in 2023, as Lister mentioned. We want to use this opportunity to work with all participating countries to identify net economic opportunities from climate action. COP28 will also be an important moment to assess the progress of the Paris Agreement and implement solutions that benefit countries with diverse economic structure. I think by hosting this important event in the Middle East, a region that is, let's be honest, often and unfortunately not directly associated with climate action, we will definitely prove that such ambitions can be from all corners around the world. And I'm looking forward, of course, to learn more from this COP. Just to let you know, part of my task, I'll be one of the team who's working on the COP28, and I'm so delighted that the government gave me these opportunities. So maybe looking forward to see some of you if you're going to be involved in the COP28 discussions. I'm looking forward to learn more from you today and to exchange thoughts on how the UAE and the UK can transfer and strengthen our collaboration in the field of energy transition. I will end up by saying, I think, in discussing climate action and sustainability, I want to emphasize that it is essential younger generation should be also involved in these discussions. And maybe this is an invitation for the Business Council next time to invite some of our youth to come and engage and listen and contribute in the future. They will be part of the future of our planet, which we are trying so hard to protect. So thank you again for the opportunity, and it's a great pleasure to be here in Aberdeen, this beautiful city. Thanks, Bradley.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. Our third and last keynote speaker I would like to introduce is David Rennie. I know David will be known to many of you. He's the Global Head of Energy at Scottish Development International. And throughout his career, he has supported Scottish energy companies internationalize and win business overseas, not just in this role, but in previous roles such as with Scottish Enterprise, where he was Head of Oil and Gas. So he's really been a very important driver of the Scottish energy industry as it's internationalized. So David, I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you, Paul, and Lord Lister and Deputy Ambassador, and ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for the invite to speak today. I know that a Scottish minister of the Scottish Government was invited, and unfortunately no one was able to attend, so I guess I'm sort of filling the gap a little bit, so please accept my apologies on their behalf for not being able to meet today. I know time's short. I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about some of the sort of similarities between the UAE and Scotland, and some of the projects or activities that are already taking place in Scotland that you may be aware of and some that you're not aware of. The UAE and Scotland are a really important trading partner. The UAE is our 12th biggest export market, with export value of around about £800 million a year. A lot of that is energy, of course, but not all. There are other sectors, of course, where we have that. So it's a very important trading market for us. And I should have said Scottish Development International, for those of you who don't know, we're the trade, inward investment and capital investment agency of the Scottish Government. So our job is to attract inward investment, our job is to attract capital investment into Scotland and help Scottish companies trade overseas. And as part of that, we already have a strong presence in the UAE. In fact, James, my colleague, James, where are you? Hand up, please. Thank you. So James is along with others, is our colleagues based in the UAE. And indeed at Expo, we had an excellent series of events back in March. We had 4 days of activity focused on energy, evening receptions as well. I think it was one of the highest attended, certainly in the UK Pavilion, the largest attended event during that time. We had a big focus on hydrogen, big focus on space as well. We had great turnout, and we've got lots of positive follow-up and meetings happening as a result of that. So Expo was a fantastic opportunity for us, and lots to follow up on as well. And of course, the UAE and Scotland have many commonalities, weather not being one of them. But one of them is that we have that sort of we have the wind. We have a lot of wind resource. We have about a quarter of Scotland's wind power across our nation. So we both have a lot of natural resources. We both are, as we see today, very focused on the energy transition agenda, and we have big challenges ahead in terms of decarbonising our oil and gas industry. And of course, both governments have committed to net zero targets as well, which no doubt we'll hear about later today as well. I just want to quickly talk about a couple of sort of projects and things that are happening in Scotland that I think show that that similarity and what Scotland can kind of offer, if you like, to both the UAE and others in terms of capabilities, projects, investment, and so on as well. So just to start with capital investment, we have something called the Scottish National Investment Bank, which was launched in 2020. And that is the UK's first, and I'm going to have to put my glasses on, sorry to keep the glasses theme going, but I have to put my glasses on, otherwise I won't see my own writing. So it's the Scottish National Investment Bank is the UK's first mission-led development bank focused on net zero people and place missions. We're currently expanding our green investment portfolio to bring together market-ready projects worth £3 billion during this year. That portfolio covers sectors environmentally sensitive commercial real estate, low emission transportation and green energy. By assessing these projects before they actually go to market, the portfolio that I'm talking about provides investors with the confidence they need to back credible and sustainable projects in Scotland. And indeed, Simon Parsons, my colleague, is here today as well. If you want to find out more about the details about that investment portfolio, Simon is your person there. So that sort of portfolio approach, promoting our book, if you like, of investment-ready projects, it's a key role in our Scottish Government Global Capital Investment Plan. So that portfolio can really help us showcase and maximise investment opportunities and to leverage capital, private capital, as we work towards our commitments around net zero and also a just transition. But as well as capital investment, we also have a number of really exciting and interesting projects in the energy transition space right now. Hydrogen is perhaps certainly one of the most interesting ones. The Scottish Government have set a target of 5 gigawatts of hydrogen production capacity by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. We currently have a draft energy strategy that's out for consultation and comment. We're really looking to build regional hydrogen hubs, both in Scotland and across the UK, but we also need help on that. So we need to connect with international partners, whether that be through technology transfer, investment, as I mentioned earlier. So, we recognise that we can't deliver, anywhere near our target without those international relationships, without capital investment and without partnership. In Scotland, we have about 50 hydrogen projects. This city has many of those. If you live in Aberdeen, you'll know about the hydrogen buses. We have hydrogen buses in Aberdeen. And we have also projects from the Northern Isles of Scotland right down to the west coast of Scotland. Some of those are focused on housing, heating. Some of those are focused on transport. We're currently developing a hydrogen-only train, in central Scotland. So that's lots of interesting projects. If you want to find out more, our own SDI website has a lot more information on the hydrogen. So hydrogen is really important. And the obvious other one is of course, offshore wind. I mentioned we have about a quarter of Scotland, Europe, energy in terms of offshore wind capacity, rather. And we obviously want to develop that. We have quite a lot of wind projects already, but that's really going to be boosted significantly in the next 5 to 10 years by the ScotWind project. So ScotWind is seeing 17 developers, 24 different projects with the capacity to deliver 25 gigawatts of offshore wind off the coast of Scotland over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And there are other projects and licensing rounds coming as well. Already, as part of the bidding process for ScotWind, we've received, the Scottish Government will receive £700 million worth of revenue, indirect revenue, as a result of ScotWind. And of course we hope, and it's my day job I guess, in many ways, is to help Scottish companies win even more of money in terms of supply chain, etc., etc. So we're working with developers right now, in effect, on the UK and Scottish content for each of these individual projects, and we're very confident that we'll see a lot of benefit coming to the Scotland, and the UK supply chain as a result of ScotWind as well. I could mention lots of other projects. I think time is tight, so I'll come to an end now. But just to say thanks to everybody for your time and attention. I hope today is a really good event. We've obviously got the Energy Export Conference that Stuart and others have been leading on this week. I'm also delighted to say that ADIPEC, after an absence of a couple of years, that SDI will be back at the ADIPEC conference, which I think is a sign of confidence in itself and the importance of those markets. So the theme of that will be very much around energy transition. So hopefully we'll see some of you there as well at that event as well. So thank you for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll pass on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're now going to move on to the first of our panel discussions. When we first started thinking about this event, and we asked our member companies, what would you like us to focus on? The response was quite universal. They said, we have a strong sense of where we need to be in 2050, but what do we need to do in the next 5 or 10 years in order to sustain that momentum to net zero and keep on that trajectory? What are the immediate things we need to do? So that's going to be the focus of the discussion in panel 1. It's going to be a 1-hour panel. We've got a brilliant lineup of speakers for it. And I'd like to start by introducing our moderator, Stuart Broadley, who, in addition to being Chief Executive of the Energy Industries Council, is also a member of our advisory committee, and he mentors us at the Business Council on the kind of areas of work we should prioritise on the energy sector. So, Stuart, I'd like you to come to the stage and then introduce the panellists for the next session.
Thank you, Brad. Microphone working? Hey! Lovely to see you all. How are you all doing? What a very fascinating but also esteemed get-together this is, and thank you for coming. I just want to start by saying what an honour it was to be asked to join the advisory board, kind of this energy co-chair role for UAE-UK at such a critical time. I've actually met the UAE energy co-chair. His name is Khalifa Al-Meri, and he's acting CEO of Taziz. A really lovely guy, very knowledgeable guy, got a big job he's got. We spent 2 or 3 hours together, and we've already got a whole bunch of ideas, so it's not yet ready to move forward. There's a lot to do, but there's so much potential. It's incredible, the potential of things we could do. David mentioned ADIPEC. My favourite show in the world is ADIPEC. And for those of you that have not been to ADIPEC, you've really missed out, not just because it is actually fun, so much to do and so many things to learn, but it's the best business event I've ever been to. It's the only exhibition and conference where it's more operators than supply chain companies. It's crazy how good this show is. So it's just kind of a sign when you work in the UAE, there's kind of a level of standard and ambition and professionalism. And I don't just say this because we have some colleagues here. I really mean it. It's quite a country, and the people really have quite some ambition. So, how exciting is this? And COP28, really looking forward to seeing what the agenda for COP28 is. I note, I think, with consistency, I think you said one of the focus areas will be robust economics, I think you said. And certainly, ADNOC has this worldwide reputation for being the lowest cost producer of oil. It kind of makes sense. I'd like someone to answer the question, what's the cheapest way to go to net zero? I'd love to know that. Anybody know that today? I can guarantee nobody has that answer. That would be a great thing to answer. With that, then, let's get on with the panel discussion. So if I could ask all the panelists to come up, please. Come all up, all at the same time. All up, please. And then we'll get into the introductions. Please, round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. Very low chairs. Okay, sort of sinking into the chair. Right, good. Are we all in safely? What I'm going to do first, I'm going to start at that end, and rather than me read off a bunch of names, we'll get each of the panelists to start working already and get them to introduce themselves, kind of 1 minute max, just with kind of who you are, what your day job is, and I'll just, leave it at that for the moment. We'll then come back into the topic. Then we're going to come to Natasha at the end, who's then going to give us a bit more perspective on the topic generally once you've introduced yourself. So with that, Alex, start with you.
Thank you very much for inviting me onto the panel, and thank you very much for this event. I think it's fascinating. My name is Alex Haynes. I look after business development for the Petrofac's New Energy Services business, which is a division we started a couple of years ago, focusing on taking our oil and gas heritage, our engineering and construction heritage, and servicing the new energy market, which we see as a huge growth opportunity and one that we hope to play a major part in.
Thank you very much. Professor Mercedes, over to you.
Thank you very much. So thanks very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. I'm based at Heriot-Watt University, but my role here is more looking in terms of the director of a UK centre, looking to decarbonize one of the most difficult sectors, actually, the industries, the heavy energy intensive industries. And doing this through a cluster approach that includes clusters in Scotland, Teesside, Humber, the Southampton of Solent, South Wales, and the Merseyside area. Over 50% of the CO2 industrial emissions come from these clusters, so we do have a challenge, and a challenge that we have to address all together. So thank you for the invitation.
Okay, great. And obviously we'll follow up after this with a whole bunch of questions. Craig, you're next. Over to you.
Good afternoon. As Stuart says, my name's Craig Shanney. I'm the President for Operation Services for Wood across Europe, Middle East and Africa. Really looking forward to today's discussions. I think it was highlighted earlier. We've got joint opportunities but also joint challenges. Decarbonisation of existing energy infrastructure at pace, managing the balance between energy security and net zero, and the skills challenge that Lord Lister mentioned earlier on. I think fantastic opportunities to discuss today, but more importantly to partner with in the future in order to accelerate ahead of COP28.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, Adi.
Hi, I'm Adekola Lawal. I'm the Carbon Capture and Storage Delivery Lead at Atkins. And I think today's session is really great. I mean, this is timely indeed, because there's significant challenges. And I believe the challenges to delivering net zero don't lie specifically with the technologies themselves. The technologies are quite well developed, but really the applications of these technologies, these things have to be applied in the right manner. And I think the ecosystem around those technologies and everything that supports those technologies are critical to the success and to the delivery of net zero. So I'm really looking forward to the discussions today, and I'm really pleased to be here.
Great, thank you. And then Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Williamson from BP. I look after part of our hydrogen business. So I look after hydrogen business in the US, UK, bit of Europe, and the Middle East. And as Lord Lister mentioned, BP's got an amazing, I'd say almost a unique partnership with ADNOC and Masdar, where we'll invest in hydrogen and Teesside together, and then also in the UAE. And I think that will bring great learning for us, hopefully for ADNOC and Masdar, as a chance to maybe move a little faster, a little quicker, and through learning maybe at a little lower cost, which I think will benefit all of us.
Lower cost. I'm sure that's one of the topics we'll come to. So now we come to Natasha Howlett with Exodus, also one of our sponsors. Very keen to get you then just to introduce yourself and then perhaps give us a bit of a starting point on the discussion around the next 5 to 10 years.
Thanks, Stuart. Natasha Howlett. So I head up the Emissions and Climate Division globally for Exodus Group. So we have been delivering services that help clients with their net zero ambitions since before anybody in this room even knew what net zero was. So we have an established reputation, very excited to be here to give you some examples of the learnings that we have of delivering these types of services in the UK and how that can be rolled out to the UAE as well. I'll just hit the road from there, I guess, Stuart. So the pressure to accelerate decarbonisation is absolutely unparalleled at the minute. Achieving net zero is a global effort. It requires consequential action now. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children, we owe it to society. Climate change is the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced, and there's no second chance if we fail at it. We need to find ways of decarbonising our assets quickly and effectively. The targets which have been set are ambitious and striking. 40% of the world's largest corporations and 50% of the world's countries have committed to meeting the expectations of net zero by 2050. Many of the changes that will help us to avoid disaster are the province of governments and companies globally, so the people in this room. The UK was the first major economy to legislate a goal of net zero by 2050. As a result, all UK oil and gas operators have made a commitment and signed up to what is known as the North Sea Transition Deal. The North Sea Transition Deal aligns with the global 2050 net zero goals, and it sets specific time-based targets, which are a 10% reduction by 2025, a 25% reduction in emissions by 2027, and a 50% reduction in your emissions by 2030. All of these compared against the 2018 baseline. Zero routine flaring by 2030 is another target that we're expected to meet, as is methane quantification and the development of asset-specific methane action plans. These targets are industry-wide. They can in part be down to decommissioning and production decline, but even so, they remain incredibly ambitious. Retaining a license to operate and emissions reduction now for the first time go hand in hand. We have seen a shift change in UK operators who are no longer looking simply for the easiest path to decommissioning and are instead focusing on extending the life of their portfolio of assets by improving, repurposing and seeking collaboration opportunities with their peers on large-scale projects such as carbon capture, electrification. So, how are we going to achieve this in the UK? Operators are obliged to identify all emissions reduction opportunities and present them in the form of an emissions reduction action plan, or an ERAP, which you may hear it referred to. These opportunities are then ranked and prioritised against a series of pre-agreed criteria, which allows the focus to be on the most effective opportunities. And it's worth pointing out that they aren't always the largest CapEx projects. In fact, our experience shows that conducting an on-site energy assessment will typically identify quick win solutions that represent at least a 20% reduction in energy and emissions. These ERAPs are expected to be live working documents which are easily updated, accessed and maintained to ensure maximum benefit is gained from them. They begin with a series of independently facilitated asset-specific workshops where key drivers are agreed and opportunities are identified and discussed with relevant operations input, because nobody knows these assets like the ops teams that work on them. The input of external independent specialists here is critical to ensuring that all of the opportunities are identified and considered. The outputs of the workshop should then be assessed against their emissions impact and the cost benefit, providing a marginal abatement. Ranking and prioritisation then occurs, and from there you will start to reap the benefits. So what is the route to decarbonisation, and what lessons have we learned from our experience carrying this work out in the UK that are easily transferable to the UAE, and indeed other parts of the world? First and foremost, you must establish a clear and robust baseline, because how can you measure your success if you don't understand your starting point, and then how do you demonstrate the success and the measures that you've taken? Secondly is identify your operational improvements. So this could be improved maintenance, inspection routines, flare and vent reduction, process improvement, process simplification. As I've mentioned, ranking and prioritising the opportunities using marginal abatement value principles is very important. Implementing the recommendations and transforming via electrification and remote operations and repurposing. And finally, cultural change at all levels is key. People must understand that emissions reduction is absolutely critical now, and it goes hand in hand with production and efficiency for the first time. This should be hardwired into each employee and stakeholder. Everyone should believe that they are part of this journey and that they are responsible personally for decarbonisation. We cannot tolerate optimism bias anymore. That's where people are overly optimistic about achieving net zero. But even with all this hype and all this good intention, we know that there is an enormous crevasse between the commitments which operators and companies are making and their understanding and ability on how to decarbonise their portfolio. Almost 80% of emissions from oil and gas production come as a result from combustion activities. In order to reduce these emissions, we need to really focus on increasing energy efficiency and performance improvements. Some of the key learnings that we know from our experience carrying out this type of work is that decarbonisation and emissions management is not normally a priority to the operations teams. They're usually focused on firefighting issues related to production and safety and reliability and integrity. We must ensure that the correct audience is not only present, but experienced on the asset that you're focusing on, enthused, and where possible, personally incentivised. And lastly, the longer companies wait to start on their net zero journey, the smaller the window of opportunity becomes for you to realise the benefits, such as fuel savings and CO2 reductions, and then the greater the pressure becomes for you to meet the targets of net zero. So finally, at a time when trying to attract talent into the energy industry, as we all know, is proving to be exceptionally challenging, improving your company credentials by demonstrating the actions which you're taking in order to achieve net zero will only help to attract and retain the right pool of smart, skilled people. So in summary, First, you have to understand your starting line, and that is your emissions baseline, in order to effectively develop your route to the finish line, which is net zero.
Thank you very much. I think that really sets the scene for us, doesn't it? And huge opportunity. It still sounds like there's a lot to do, and there certainly is. Alex, then, I'm going to come to you just with a little bit on where do you think we start with this? I mean, is this mega projects, or is it kind of baseline operate, just dealing with our existing assets? Or where do we start?
So it's a good question, because I think many countries are struggling with that, exactly where to start, how to make it economic. We're seeing two markets effectively in a number of areas. And we, as Petrofac, we looked a few years ago when we started looking at how can we bring our oil and gas experience and our skills at EPC into this new market and the new energy transition. And we looked at 5 areas, and one was certainly emissions reduction, and with the price of gas right now, if you can reduce flaring, it makes economic sense for one. The second one was wind, and we've been active in offshore wind for over 10 years now, mainly in the big substations. And again, a lot of the green revolution we're looking at, the net zero projects, are all fundamentally based upon abundance of green or low carbon electricity. So building out that wind as a base load for those projects is absolutely critical. And we're pleased to be continuing that. And we see ScotWind, it's a huge mega project that's going to be resourced, a great opportunity, but also a big challenge. We also look at hydrogen, and hydrogen is tricky. It's clearly going to be one of the vectors for low carbon energy, both blue and green. However, hydrogen struggles a little bit on large scale because you need regulation. You need to know who your offtake is going to be and what price they're going to pay for that offtake. And when you get a large mega project, some of the blue projects, some of the large export projects, you see these projects slowing down actually due to those uncertainties in the market. And what price will I get? How much will it cost? How do I transport it? What's the regulation for transporting the hydrogen? Where we've seen a surprising speed of action is in a very sort of behind the meter hydrogen projects, where I was explaining a little bit over lunch. We're seeing enlightened customers, you could call them in the UK, small scale customers, mainly manufacturers, whether it be food and drink or beverage or food or small, so even whiskey. We've been looking at whiskey projects, right, where the value of the energy they need in order to make their product is a relative small percentage of the cost of that product. So they can afford to change from a fossil fuel to heat their boilers to a green hydrogen solution. And that has a relatively small impact on the cost of the overall product. But they've got maybe an external market commitment to be net zero by a certain date, and they can't wait for large-scale blue supply through the national grid or through a cluster project. And so they don't need the regulation because it's produced on site with an electrolyzer. They don't need the off-taker because they are their own off-taker, and they can sell more net zero whiskey, net zero beer, net zero food for a slightly more a small price or a small tax in order to get there. And they want to get first to market, they can sell more. So we're seeing that almost smaller scale projects go quicker. And I think that's something maybe the UAE could be looking at, is looking at small scale factories that they have in the UAE, small scale productions where you can produce green aluminium, green steel, green fertilizers, where you're your own off-taker, and you can then get a premium for that product without having to rely on large
so I'm going to come to Mercedes on this idea of do you go mega or do you go near a series of small projects? What does from an innovation and technology point of view, is there any reason to think that we're still at the pilot stage with most of these technologies? Or does the technology-wise we can go big? So is it then just the commercial challenge that restricts us?
So that's a very good question. But let me just, something that we shouldn't forget here when we have all these conversations is that there is no planet B. So let's not forget that, because sometimes we get entrenched into all these details and which color of hydrogen and which project to go first, and we forget this picture. So let's keep that in mind as we go through the conversation today. In terms of the projects that we see, what we have to have is a series of projects where we start building that infrastructure. And that is really key, because this decade that we are now, this 2020s, is really going to be this decade of action. If we don't set the right infrastructure, if we don't start deploying the right technologies, we are going to run out of time. And whatever we have left to do to 2050, it's going to be a lot harder to get there. So it is important that we deploy technology. It is important that we deploy a range of technologies and that we do it at pace and scale. And in some technologies, like in hydrogen, there is no business model. There are no off-takers right now. So we have to make sure that we develop the whole supply chain. It's not only about producing the hydrogen. It's how we're going to transport that hydrogen, or how we may need the storage if there is an intermittency issue, and who is going to be using it. And one of the things that we're doing in IDREC is looking at this as a whole systems approach. So we need to have technology, and clearly steel has to go in the ground in terms of these projects, whether you want to call them anchor projects or mega projects. But we also need to make sure that then to have a wider deployment, we need to have the business models, and we need to have the regulatory, and we need to have the finance as well to go behind. And there is one point going back to your question as well, and this, do not get scared with this. I'm sure probably many of you know this anyway, but 50% of the CO2 emissions that we need to cut down by 2050, we do not have the technologies at the scale today. So there's a huge element here for research and innovation to make sure that we keep the pace. And when I say 50% of those CO2 emissions, we don't have the technologies, please take this in the broader sense. In some cases, maybe that the technology is there, but has not been demonstrated at the scale. In other cases, maybe that the business model hasn't quite found the right trick here. But it's as much as that. So we keep deploying these projects. Infrastructure is key in this 2020 decade. But at the same time, we need to keep moving with the research and innovation to make sure we have the technologies that we need for 2030 and 2050 goals.
So that's interesting. So it's a mix of, we have some established technologies, but perhaps the supply chain's not there. In other cases, we don't have the technology to meet half of, in example, the CO2 reduction and emission reduction. Okay. Craig, just trying to continue this discussion. And I think once we've gone round once, if anybody has any questions, then we'll start seeking hands up. So start thinking about tough questions for the panel. We've got an excellent panel here. Craig, from an investment point of view, whether it's wood or just generally, how to approach a market like this then? Where are the investments flowing? Is this still a bit of a, it might be planet A, there's no planet B, but still there's a risk out, there's a shareholder, there's someone that's like, well, hang on, tell me why I should do that. How do we approach it from an investment point of view?
So I think there's a risk in all of this, and it's we get paralysed by inaction, and I think Mercedes captured it really well. Pace is really important. If I could stitch together, maybe Natasha talked about decarbonisation of existing infrastructure, which is absolutely key, and I think a lot of that is happening. There's great digital technology there, helping our clients with roadmaps towards net zero. But then fast forwarding to what Alex was talking about, we're talking about hydrogen and other elements which are still a number of years away. And what Mercedes means here is we need to close that gap. So whilst the incremental decarbonisation of existing infrastructure is critical, what we really need to see are the transformational projects, CCS, electrification. And that's where Lord Lister spoke earlier on about, I don't think there's any challenge in terms of investment. I think the challenge we've got is the economic stability. Rawad talked about cleaner, sustainable and economic, and that's where we need to move and utilise perhaps a partnership.
Do you mean the shocks of the system that are like, oh, I'm waiting for the next shock, or do you mean the investment decision making?
Absolutely. I mean, the windfall tax, for instance, is a shock to the system that again, how do we? And there's so much involved. I mean, Matt and I were talking about that earlier on. There's hydrogen, there's CCS. How do we make sure that we've got agile enough policy making that fast forwards the economic stability of those markets to mature them, that gives access to investment, that matures the technology, and that lets us move forward? Because the fundamental aspect here is we need predictability to get back to the people point, or we'll lose the skills from the industry.
This is a UK point or a global point?
It's absolutely a global point. I think the UK and the UAE have got the same challenges. We're struggling to attract and retain existing skills that we need for energy security in the short term and decarbonisation, let alone future skills such as digital and technology and new energy. And that's a real critical aspect that I think we need to be working together on.
Okay, so we're sort of peeling away the layers here. Adi, let's come to you then. In fact, Craig there talked about there's a skills challenge as well. From your point of view, are you seeing that as you're looking at the CCS projects that you're working on? Are you already saying that there was no way we could, if all of this happens, we could never deliver it?
We are seeing that. I think it's a big challenge. Sometimes it's very easy to underestimate the challenge in the new types of technologies and the new types of challenges that the energy industry is facing at the moment. And as I mentioned that when I started, a lot of these technologies have existed for decades. And CCS technology, for example, we've applied that to oil and gas production for decades at a different scale with a different system. But SNC leveling, which Atkins is part of the group, built currently the only operational CCS plant, commercial CCS plant on a power plant at Saskatchewan in Canada. So that's a Boundary Dam project. And if you look at the elements of the chain that make up that particular project, so first of all, you have the power plant, and the CCS component is basically dealing with the carbon emissions from that power plant. And it does that with a chemical process, which has been established in industry. And there are people that have specializations on that particular part of technology. But you have to integrate that also with compression technology. So you compress that, you condition your CO2 to conditions that you could put down a pipeline, and that pipeline goes to a facility that you could use to inject and store that CO2 and hopefully store that permanently under the ground so that you abate those emissions. So what I've described now is a CCS chain, and there's challenges on scale, as Professor Mercedes mentioned, in terms of applying those technologies, but there's also bigger challenges on the integration of all these particular elements. And what you see when you look at CCS projects and similar projects, even hydrogen projects as well, there's the issue about looking at the value chain. The value chain is very important, and a lot of these projects, a lot of these developments fail because these certain elements, the weakest link probably in the value chain, drops out and makes the whole project no longer viable. So yes, indeed, there are skill shortages in terms of actually applying these technologies the right way. And I think it's critical that right from the front end, when the decisions are being made, that the right types of technologies are applied to the right situations and the right ecosystems to make these technologies actually deliver what you want them to.
So powerful words. And so it kind of sounds all a little bit like, oh, it's quite difficult, isn't it? So now it's great to have Matt here, who's going to talk about a real project. And maybe just tell us a bit about the Teesside project, the relationship with ADNOC, and a little bit of kind of how you're approaching that project. And I guess start to reassure us that it is hard, but it can happen.
Yeah, so
over to you, please.
I do think there are reasons to be optimistic. So I'll talk about Teesside, but Mercedes has talked about clusters in the UK, and Teesside and Humberside are part of the East Coast cluster, only part of it. And we can see very practical ways that we can implement today that will have a huge decarbonisation impact. So just for the East Coast cluster, we're talking about 20 million tonnes a year of CO2 captured, stored safely in secure reservoirs, very much the reverse of what our geologists have been doing for 100 years, although they are super motivated to put the CO2 back in the ground. So that's 7 million households in the UK. So it's a real tangible thing. And the reason why you can do it at such scale is that the emissions are concentrated in some of the sort of great UK industrial hubs. Now, in the UAE, already capturing CO2 from some industrial processes. BP is lucky to be a partner in the reservoir of where the CO2 goes. So we know it can be done because we've seen it work in Abu Dhabi. It can work in the UK. And the UK government has got behind this. It supported the cluster process, and we are hopeful that the government will continue to support the hydrogen part of it as well. And even though Teesside is only one cluster, but we all benefit even if Teesside was decarbonised. So when my dad paints his shed in Somerset, he will use paint which is essentially made in Teesside, but that paint will be decarbonised. So he's happy to pay more for his whiskey, and we shouldn't stop doing the small-scale projects because we've got to do more. So he'll pay more for his whiskey, and he's very happy to pay, I don't know what the price would be, it's probably less than 5 pence a tin to decarbonise it, but we can all benefit from these big projects. But they're big projects, and that means you don't want to do them alone. And so you want to do them with good technology partners, good investment partners, and I don't want to embarrass Lord Lister, but with good government partners. So when governments set targets and they start moving towards those targets, things change. So I can't remember who I was talking to at lunch, but we couldn't get trucks manufacturers to invest in hydrogen trucks that would be fit for UK roads because they didn't think there was going to be enough right-hand drive demand. But because the government set out ambitious decarbonising targets, they could then see, oh yes, there will be hydrogen trucks in the UK. We're working with Daimler on a network of hydrogen distribution for trucks, which again will take some of the ugly diesel trucks off our roads, and we'll have some beautiful zero carbon at point of use hydrogen trucks on the road. So there's an awful lot of stuff we can do together. Us partnering with ADNOC and Masdar, who are great UAE energy giants, will help us to do better projects in the UK and better projects in the UAE by sharing the learning. So we'll go that bit faster and we'll learn. And it's also going to create a chance to build supply chains. So I know that we don't want to overpromise on supply chains, but in the UK, I think a lot of people say we got the wind wrong in terms of that we massively grew the UK's renewable power, fantastic, but almost all of that wind manufacturing was done offshore. So we're trying to engage with suppliers today, even though, even in my best and wildest dreams, we won't be starting up our blue hydrogen project until 2027. We're starting today talking with suppliers, so hopefully they've got time to grow UK supply chains to feed that project. We're talking with schools so that the school leavers in Teesside can enter the workforce with the right skills to go into a long-term low-carbon work. The reason we're doing that is because we think it's the right thing to do, and we know it's what the UK government wants. So they want supply chains built, and we're pretty sure that in the UAE, the same thing. So if we can build these supply chains, it's great for UK companies, it's great for UAE companies, and from a project developer, we're going to do better projects as a result of it. So loads of reasons to be optimistic, but we must learn to work together and see the broader benefits, even if the investment is not directly on our doorstep.
Thank you. And it's actually pretty inspirational, isn't it, to hear about these real projects when they happen. And it's like, okay, it can happen. All of us, though, have to work out our own journey of how we participate and make our own personal and our own business adapt and become part of that solution rather than part of the problem, because we absolutely do not have a planet B. So, Natasha, listening to all that, you gave us a very good kind of opening statement. What are your thoughts on that? And I'm particularly interested in the ERAP that you focused on. And is that going to be enough to kind of hold some companies accountable to really take the journey forward in terms of their own emission reductions?
Absolutely. In my view, that is step number one. That's key to planning that journey and making that plan for energy companies, absolutely. How else can you do it? So what we're seeing a lot of at the minute is companies coming to us with a list of projects that range in scale enormously, a range of projects that they have just kind of pie in the sky thought, right, that's the one that we think will get the most emission savings from, so we want you to focus on that. And actually, I would say 80% of the time that's not the case. What they really need to do is go back to basics, look at all of the opportunities and all of the projects that they have on the books, and look at identifying new ones, which is where the government's introduction of ERAPs comes in, because that's exactly what it's asking you to do. It's asking you to have an independent view of what are all of the opportunities that you have available to you here, and then make sure that you rank them accordingly, because it's not always the massively expensive projects. You know, we very much focus on fixing what you have now, improve what's here now, and make the best of what you have for the time being while the technology and the infrastructure catches up.
Just ask it, who has to do the ERAP?
All UK operators, that's the expectation.
Okay. And will there be transparency so it's a bit kind of clear on, you know, the kind of league table or some action plan? Or
not at the minute, but we believe that's coming in the not so distant future. At the minute, there's not even an expectation to submit them. It's just an expectation that you need to have them in your back pocket, because at any point the regulator could come along and say, right, we want to see this, and we want to see that you're demonstrating how you're performing against it.
Okay, so you've heard a lot. It's a wide spectrum of things. Remember, we're under this heading of next 5 to 10 years. How do we really make progress? Anybody have any questions at this point? Anybody want to jump in? We've got a great panel here. What are you thinking? Yes, but I don't really want to be the first. Anybody? Anybody? Okay, great. Over here. Luca. Yes, it's on its way. Luca, introduce yourself. And yeah.
From Net Zero Technology Center, and thank you for a very interesting panel discussion. Thank you for making the case for technology innovation alongside deployment. I think that's very important. I wonder if you have a view on, in the UK-UAE partnership, where would you start on technology innovation? Which technology can we innovate together and deploy at pace that makes an impact together? The UK oil and gas is much offshore, the UAE is mostly onshore, carbon capture is a common area potentially, hydrogen another one. But where would you start in putting together a consortium to deploy new technology for net zero and to innovate at the same time while we do it? Because as you said, we only have half of the technology we need for 2050.
Great question. Who would like to take that one? Mercedes, let's come to you. Yeah, that's
I don't know whether Luca was looking at me or I just say. I'm maybe an easy victim here. I don't know, but I'll just give it a go. Yeah, so completely agree. You know, I just say we do need to have a little bit of this parallel approach. I think it's and I think that's part of what we are aiming to do here as well in terms of getting these collaborations, getting these ideas. I don't think it's going to be one single bullet, you know, one silver bullet that is going to take care of everything. And it's important we look at this portfolio of solutions. I think there is one difference that is between the UAE and the UK. And I say this also coming, as Harriet Watt, as probably you know, we also have a campus in Dubai as well as in Scotland and Malaysia. So we understand and we work quite closely with partners in UAE. But the population in UAE is growing very, very rapidly, much more than it is doing in the UK. So we need to be conscious that the challenge and the opportunity, let's not forget that, is about how you decarbonize in a country that is very rapidly growing in the population and is very rapidly growing to urbanization. And I think this is a significant difference with what we see in other parts of the world. And urbanization is actually a global mega trend. It's not going to be stopped. So I think what we need to consider is how we develop these solutions, who are going to be the providers of those solutions, and how they can actually be arranged to multiple contexts, because the context is going to be different. And I think this is happening. I mean, we already heard about the Teesside project with ADNOC, so it is happening. I think we need to do more, and we need to do it at a bigger scale and pace. And I think we are doing the right things, but we are not doing them quickly enough, and we are not doing them at the scale that we should be doing. So I think that's really important, is how do we accelerate what we do? I don't think it's new things. I think we are doing all the right things to a big extent. We just need to increase the pace and the scale of that.
Matt, I might also get you to touch on this, just in terms of this UK, UAE, what's next? You know, how do we take it forwards? What are the ideas, technologies? Obviously, you're kind of leading the way.
Yep.
Any thoughts?
So it was a really good question. It's got me thinking.
You knew it was coming, didn't you? Yeah.
So, I mean, we're saying hydrogen's the place to start, but we're coming from a place where do we have common resource? So that's kind of like hydrocarbons and CO2 stores, and so that's a perfect place to collaborate. So any technology around that is going to be a good thing for those projects, but also from a renewable perspective. So the renewable endowment is a little bit different from the UK, where there's just masses of offshore wind, which may lead to different technology innovations, whereas in Abu Dhabi, maybe it's going to be more about solar. But then how we use that hydrogen could be common. So I talked a little bit about heavy-duty trucks, where there's lots of uses for hydrogen into transport. So it's not just trucks. So trains, hydrogen, yes. Maybe boats or boats with ammonia as derivative. So I think that's an incredibly exciting place to look at is ship propulsion. How do we get away from the worst, heavy, sticky marine fuel oil to something that is low carbon, like hydrogen or ammonia? And then aeroplanes. So I like my holiday to the sun as much as anybody, but it scares me the amount of CO2 that I know that I'm having to offset when I do that. I know that offsetting is not a perfect way of solving it. So hydrogen goes into aviation, sustainable aviation fuel, but it's still expensive and it's still at low volumes. So I think there's massive opportunities to innovate across those low hydrogen carbon use cases, and the hydrogen will be lower cost in Abu Dhabi because of the amazing sunshine and gas and CCUS than it is in the UK. By the time you transport it to the UK, probably similar cost. So Abu Dhabi might be the place to do some experimentation on these use cases, because the actual raw cost in Abu Dhabi is going to be much less. But these are only ideas.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Luke. I was going to come to you, Alex, actually, because I think respond to that, but also I'm interested to know then to kind of another thing that's, of course, a collaborative approach between the two states or the two countries is we've just done COP26, COP28 is coming, and we've got Egypt in the middle, and whether you've also, I know you've kind of got a bit of experience on the approach to COP27, so maybe, yeah, try and pick up on those two.
So just to follow up on Luca's question, I think clearly CCS and hydrogen are obvious ones, but again, what Matt said, SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, is a key one. You know, the UAE is a major aviation hub, and if we can find a way to take waste fuels, there's a number of technologies and you know, early use cases we're seeing in the UK that we're lucky enough to be involved in, and we think that taking that waste plastics, waste tyres, even biofuels from various sort of food derivatives, can be useful to get to SAF. I think that's a clear way of decarbonising and actually keeping that business model of, you know, fly everyone through Abu Dhabi or through Dubai on the way. Great airlines, great place to come. So let's do it in a low carbon way. I think that could be a real differentiator for the UAE, and actually something that they've got a good opportunity to do. And we do need some scale, some projects to help prove this SAF route through. So I think that's one. On the COP piece, you know, UK, we had it in 2019. So it was actually
last year.
It was last year, wasn't it? Crikey,
yeah. Time flies.
In Glasgow, yeah. So for COP26, and Egypt has sort of taken that baton over in November in Sharm el-Sheikh and then Abu Dhabi the following year. And I think it's a great opportunity for the Middle East. The UK has taken that, and across Europe actually, we've kind of been a bit holier than thou in our net zero ambitions and our regulations. We're a bit further on than that. But historically, the UK, particularly in Europe, has been the worst emitters, and the UAE, the Gulf region as a region, has been an energy giant, an energy producer for the globe, and if we are going to rewire the systems for the whole, you know, the globe in terms of energy production and energy use, then the Gulf region and Abu Dhabi and Dubai needs to be part of that solution, right? You've got the vision, the scale to get it done. So it's really exciting to see what's going on in Egypt in November, which I think, you know, is coming up very fast. And there's a real appetite in Egypt. They're not quite as far forward in their thinking, I believe, as UAE, in that Egypt doesn't yet have a net zero target, which does stimulate local conversations and local action. And I do believe that, you know, with Egypt and then into UAE, you're going to have a massive opportunity to take that leadership and actually make a real difference to us getting to net zero and solving the climate problem. We cannot do it without the major energy producer of the world getting on board and finding ways and having that vision. And I look at UAE in terms it's done with IRENA back in 2009, with the Expo recently as well. There's real vision, there's real appetite, and a can-do attitude. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that goes, and any way that the UK can lend its experience of hosting COP26 and the work we've done and the mistakes we've made up to now, CCS being case in point over the last 10 years trying to get it off the ground. Can we fast track the UAE together to make a real big impact? So I think that's a huge opportunity.
Great. So So let's just go back to the core topic of this panel, which is we've got 5 to 10 years to make real progress, and surely that has to be looking at existing assets. And so, Craig, from your point of view, there's digital, there's emission reduction, there's still safety, there's cost reduction. Can these all fit together? Is this the way to go beyond all of the projects and the ambition, which is we just have to fix the assets we have, all of us, our own operations and the way we run our businesses? I know that's kind of a big focus within Wood, so kind of talk us through that.
I mean, I don't think there's one. I think they all need to coexist. I think that's important. And maybe we'll just come back to that question in a second, because when Luca asked the question about technology evolution, I mean, Matt talked about clusters. There's many clusters that have been given the go-ahead. There's many clusters, hopefully, and I won't mention them, but David probably knows the name of one of them, that we need to get off the ground as well. And what these combine is CCS, renewable energy, hydrogen. So this is where I would like to see the pace injected into it. This is where I would like to see the investment and the government working in conjunction with industry in order to fast track, because that's when you get technology evolution. I think from a decarbonisation perspective, digital and technology has got a massive role to play, but it's also got a massive role to play in the energy transition as well. We shouldn't forget whether that's in the technology itself or the skills that we need in order to fast track. And I think every company represented here will have their own digital technology solutions for decarbonisation. But as I said before, these are incremental at present. And I think it's the transformational projects that we need to see more of. I think Professor Mercedes said it really eloquently. We need to see pace in that. We need to see investment. We need to see fiscal stability. We need to make them economic, and we need to move forward. Because I think within the next 5 years, that's fundamentally important in order to not only give us the opportunity to work in conjunction with UAE to support them in the UK, but also in the UAE as well.
Andy, then, so Craig there was talking about we do need some transformational projects, and of course you've been working on one, haven't you, with the first iron and steel CCS project in the UAE. Do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, Atkins hasn't been working on that particular project, but we've been working with the UAE government in developing hydrogen technology with TACA, particularly hydrogen and its derivatives. But just going back to Luca's question and on that particular point.
Lucas, yours was a good question. Everybody wants to give you an answer. Good. Go. Yeah.
Indeed, there are good opportunities to collaborate, and I think both sides have opportunities to benefit from the other's experience. So to that particular project you talked about, the UAE has developed the first carbon capture and storage project on an iron and steel facility, and it's using the CO2 from that to store onshore on enhanced oil recovery fields. And I think that operational experience, the plant has been operational since 2016. That operational experience is critical and is important, and I think the UAE is looking to expand the operations of that particular facility, so it's currently storing about 800,000 tons of CO2 per annum, and they're looking to expand that significantly. And I think the UAE can benefit from the UK's structure of developing CCS clusters. So I think there's lessons and knowledge transfer that can go both ways. The operational experience of developing CCS projects that UAE has, and the UK could also deliver some experience with the CCS clusters. One additional point, just related to that, I think the decarbonization of industry is quite important, because for the industrial sources, as Professor Mercedes mentioned earlier on, industrial decarbonization is particularly a challenge. And whilst you look at the single large point sources of carbon dioxide, you have lots of dispersed sources all around, developing products, manufacturing goods, and the rest. And those contribute significantly to carbon emissions. And experience of the UAE decarbonizing the iron and steel industry could be transferred to some of these industries as well. But it's really important to just take note that it's not just the big, huge infrastructure projects, but also the learnings that come from those projects and the benefits of the infrastructure that comes with those projects could be transferred to the smaller industries as well to help with industrial decarbonization at a smaller scale.
Okay, and just to keep us on the schedule here, so we started 10 minutes late, so we're going to finish about 5 minutes late. If I try and put all this together, there's an awful lot of projects, pilots, clusters. It feels like we're at risk of going quite slowly when you put all this together, doesn't it? And an awful lot of supply chain issues. And so opportunities everywhere, but are we going big enough, fast enough, Matt?
It's easy for me to say no, but we live in the real world, and we live in a real world where lots of people are struggling to pay their energy bills. And in this low carbon future, we are going to have to pay a bit more for our energy for it to be low carbon. So I don't think there's an easy answer on this. So what we can do is to be ready to go faster and to make it as low cost as possible, and not get attached to pet projects or pet technologies. Just what's the lowest cost way to decarbonise? And we can be ready as soon as the public environment is ready. And that's kind of, we rely on everybody to be part of that.
Mercedes, you wanted to build on that?
Yes, I think that's a very good point. I think maybe we have not touched on that through the previous minutes. And as much as we talk about the scale and pace, and it's been a message, it's been coming, I think, from all of us, I think it also has to be a just transition. So let's not forget, it's easy to talk about being more efficient when you have plenty or when you have to spare, but there are many parts where don't have to spare. So let's keep that in mind as well. So I think that the concept, and that's something Scotland is very strong as well in terms of the just transition, we need to make sure that we keep that as well within this pace and scale.
Natasha, you laid out very nicely at the start for us. Have you heard things that encourage you, that we're heading in the right direction, we're going fast enough, or you still got, you listen to all this, do you think, what, I'm concluding this or that? What's your view? What are you hearing?
I think we've still got a very long way to go, but we've seen a shift change in the last 2 years, I would say, where there's definitely an increased appetite and interest in companies getting after this now. And that's the first time I've seen that in my career.
It feels real, doesn't it?
It does, definitely.
It's not going to stop now. It's just there are so many options for how we get there.
Absolutely. This isn't a short-term compliance deadline. This is what we're all focusing on now.
Okay. We've got time for one more quick question. Literally, I'm going to take one question with one person answering. Anybody got an urgent? There's an urgent one in the middle here. Now, I hope this isn't, what's the best technology? Because then everybody's going to answer. We haven't got time for that.
Not quite. Georgina Maslin from Exodus Group. Sorry, there's a few of us here today. From an Australian perspective, particularly Western Australia, a lot of the decarbonisation is driven by private sector, which is quite unusual in the global scheme of things, where a lot of it's driven by a lot of policy and a lot of that side of things. So we've got Twiggy Forest, we've got a lot of people investing in different forms of technologies. One of the challenges we have is having to transport across really long distances. So long haul is a significant challenge for lots of different companies. We're seeing a lot of companies looking to invest in many forms of technologies all at the same time, just so that they're at the forefront where you start to see one or more of them become mainstream. I guess the question is, how do you typically work through that? We talked about the value chain, we talked about different forms of technologies. How do you go through typically that process of what technology is best for that? Is it electric vehicles, hydrogen? It's a really interesting challenge for a lot of our clients.
So if I could, thank you so much. Because I'm going to ask each of you to just do like 30 seconds on wrap up in your view and try and answer that as you go, okay? But I would summarize it actually as just, so how do you bring this to life for your business and your clients? It might be, that question is, what's technology? How do I transport? How do I get the off-taker to the supplier? How do I get the renew? There's so many topics. But Alex, first 30 seconds, and then we'll just run down, and each of you please summarize.
I think in answer to your question, it really depends on the project, on the client, and on the constraints. There is, you've talked about silver bullets. I think Boris Johnson used this phrase, not to quote him too much, but he's phrased, it's silver shotgun, right? You need lots of different things. We've come from a very monoculture in terms of fossil fuels as a solution for everything. And actually we're going to end up with electric where it works, hydrogen where it works, ammonia where it works, solar where it works, etc. And I think that's really exciting. And just to wrap up, it's a challenge, right? But it's also a huge, exciting opportunity. And we're seeing a lot of our more junior or even more senior engineers, really enthused by this problem and this challenge. And it's going to be the engineers, it's going to be the economists, it's going to be the construction workers, it's going to be the operators that solve this problem for mankind, right? And actually, what a great way to get the youth enthused. And I take Rada's point, we should have more youth here and more junior people, because they're the future and they're the ones who come to us knocking on our door saying, I'm joining Petrofac because I want to work on new energy projects and I don't want to do anything with oil and gas. Yeah. And I'm hearing that quite a lot, and they want to join the group. So it's encouraging as well in the fact that I think the energy is there, the brain power is there, the desire is there, and it's nice to align your values with your job as well. And I think that's becoming much more important to the newer generations. And I think you get a better result as a result.
Thank you. Mercedes.
I couldn't have said better what you said. I think, how do you bring these things to life? Through people. People are really going to be bringing these things, these ideas. I think just making sure that we get, as soon as we can get some of our engineers or economists, this really broad spectrum that we need of disciplines working together. And I think it's really through people as well, because we've talked about the challenges, is the opportunity I think maybe we should reflect as well that we have here. But really to untap those opportunities is going to be through collaboration and cooperation. Make sure that we coordinate efforts, that we don't go in separate ways, actually maybe repeating the same mistakes in some cases. So I think it's a lot of that collaboration and cooperation going on. And I think my last thought here will be, I think we've been unfortunate in calling it race to net zero, because race seems to imply there is a winner here, right? And for me, something that is very clear here is this is a team game, really. Unless we all are together and we all make these changes happen, we are not going to be successful in these net zero targets. So I think we need to make sure we bring this to life through people and we do it together.
Thank you. Craig?
Maybe just building on that theme, maybe answering the question first, and I think it's an evolution. We're involved in a number of these projects where you're looking to create an economy, but you need a seed for that, be it using ammonia in the first instances, transitioning to hydrogen. I think that's a feature of today. Let's not wait for the final solution, let's work together. And I think if we're going to be successful in the short term, it's probably going to be driven by three enablers. First being policy, creating a bit more fiscal stability and being clearer on investment incentivisation. I think then pace, because that will deliver pace, it will deliver the CapEx investment that we need to get the major infrastructure projects off the ground. But lastly, and by no means least, people. That's not only the skills and effort that we need now and in the future, but to Matt's point, really considering the people in terms of the whole economy and how they can play into that. So I think if we can accelerate and work together as UAE and UK there, that's a really high performing, successful energy transition partnership.
That comes on to the next panel, which is reskilling. So it is a people topic. So Adi.
It's a very good question, and I agree totally with all the points that the speakers made. I think innovation is key, and I'm really excited about this space. I'm excited to be working in this space because I'm working with lots of people and lots of brilliant people and brilliant companies, brilliant organizations. Atkins is helping a developer for the Whitetail Clean Energy Project, which is also part of the East Coast cluster. And that technology is using natural gas to produce clean electricity with zero emissions, literally, because it's a new thermodynamic cycle. So it's rethinking how you build a gas turbine, and this thing actually works, and it's solving a particular challenge that has existed by looking at it differently, thinking outside the box, and that's what we need for these types of solutions. And it's really exciting, as you said, and it's really a good time to be in the industry. There are opportunities. What I think one last point I will add to what I've said is that there's also significant risk that's being taken on by all these developers, and it's up to governments and up to the society in general to recognize the fact that there is significant risk, and that risk must be managed. The risk also should be rewarded as well.
Matt?
So I'm going to try and do three things. I'm going to try and listen to our customers. I'm going to try and listen to the society where we operate and the governments where we operate. And I think they will, if we listen carefully, tell us what the solution is. And I think that in 20 years' time, I won't worry, I won't look back and say, oh, I didn't pick the perfect solution. and worry about that, I will look back, and if I didn't do anything, that's when I'd really feel bad. So I'm not going to worry about perfect. We're just going to listen as best we can and provide that solution.
Very good. Natasha, final thoughts?
I think my final thoughts are in relation to something Alex said about the younger generation coming and saying, you know, we don't want to be in oil and gas anymore. I hear the word dirty quite a lot. I feel quite strongly about the fact that actually that's not the case. These assets exist and we need this supply of energy for the time being until the cleaner energies become more available, more tried and tested, and the infrastructure exists. So I think we need to stay away from the attitude of, you know, oil and gas is dirty and is over and done with. Actually, what we can do is clean it up, make it as efficient as we can do, and reduce the emissions associated with those operations as much as we can, while the technology is catching up and while the infrastructure is coming into play. And actually, when we've started having those conversations with the younger engineers that we work with, that's really enthusing them and making them realise, oh, okay, so this is where we can actually make a difference right now. And the other point relates to what Mercedes said about this being a race to net zero. I completely agree with this. It's not a race. This is a journey. It's a road trip, let's face it. And what happens on a road trip? You get punctures, you run out of fuel, your Google Maps die. You find alternative ways around these hiccups in the road. And so there is no answer at the minute. You just have to get on that road trip and make it work.
Thank you so much. I hope you agree that's been a fascinating discussion. Brilliant panelists. Great start to the event. Please, round of applause. Thank you.
Stuart, thank you. I mean, lots of interesting things said there. No plan B, but this is very real. And we have a great set of panelists to explore the opportunities between the two countries.